The first sensation was the cold. A biting, damp cold that seeped through the thin prisoner's robes and gnawed at her bones. Then, the smell, a nauseating cocktail of mud, rust, and the coppery tang of blood. Shenli's knees were ground into the rough, wet stones of the execution platform, her arms wrenched behind her back by two impassive guards. Icy rain fell in sheets, plastering her hair to her cheeks and washing the grime from the stones in pink-tinged rivulets. This is it, she thought, her mind a strange, hollow echo chamber. This is the end. Her family was already gone. The platform was stained with their life. She had been forced to watch, her father's stern, loyal face contorted in a final, silent scream of defiance before the blade fell. Her mother, her brothers, their heads, placed on pikes along the city wall as a warning against treason. A treason they did not commit. A shadow fell over her. She didn't need to look up. She knew his presence, the scent of sandalwood and imperial ink that had once made her heart flutter. Now, it made her stomach clench with a nausea that had nothing to do with fear. Shenli, Crown Prince Li Wei's voice was smooth, almost conversational, a cruel contrast to the scene around them. Of all the disappointments I have faced, you were the most surprising. She forced her head up. Raindrops clung to her eyelashes, blurring his image. He stood under a giant oil paper umbrella held by a servant, pristine in his golden dragon-embroidered robes. His face, so handsome it could make poets weep, was arranged in an expression of mild regret. But his eyes were the cold, flat stones of a deep well. You promised, she whispered, her voice raw from screaming, from crying, from days of silence. You promised my father would be spared if I confessed. Li Wei tilted his head, a faint, mocking smile playing on his lips. Did I? I recall saying his fate would be considered. And I have considered it. The Empire cannot tolerate a snake in its nest, especially one nurtured by the Shen clan. He took a step closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. You were so easy, little Li. So trusting. Your love was a key that unlocked your own family's coffin. The words were a physical blow, more brutal than the executioner's axe. The memories flashed before her eyes, the secret meetings in the moonlit gardens, his vows spoken against her hair, the way he had coaxed information about her father's movements, his frustrations with the court, all of it, a carefully laid trap. And she, the lovesick fool, had walked right into it. A guttural sound, half sob, half snarl, tore from her throat. Why? Why? He chuckled softly. Your father's loyalty was to the Empire, not to me. He would never have supported my accelerated ascent. And you, my dear, were the perfect, fragile tool to remove him. A tragic tale, really. The lovesick daughter, manipulated by traitors, leading to her family's downfall. It garners sympathy for the crown, you see. He gestured negligently to the executioner. Make it clean. The world narrowed to the glint of the raised blade, catching the dull gray light of the stormy sky. Shenli closed her eyes. Not in prayer, but in a final, searing vow. If there is a next life. If the heavens grant me one more chance. I will not be gentle. I will not be kind. I will not love. I will remember this cold. I will remember this betrayal. And I will burn your world to the ground, Li Wei. I swear it. The blade fell. A gasp ripped through her, a violent, shuddering intake of breath. Her eyes flew open. Silence. Warm, perfumed silence. She was lying on a bed of incredible softness, wrapped in silk sheets. The air was thick with the delicate scent of peony and agarwood. Moonlight, not rain, streamed through the latticed window, painting silver patterns on the polished dark wood floor. The Western Pavilion. Her old bedchamber in the Shen Manor. Her hands flew to her neck. Smooth, unbroken skin. She scrambled out of bed, her legs shaky, and stumbled to the bronze mirror on the dressing table. A young face stared back, wide, innocent eyes, unlined skin, the soft, rounded features of a girl not yet 17. The face of the fool she had been. It's a dream. A cruel, final dream before oblivion. A faint noise from outside her room snapped her to attention. A soft scuffing, the whisper of a sliding door. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, living drum. This was too vivid. The feel of the cool floor beneath her bare feet, the rustle of her own sleep robes, this was real. Moving on silent feet, she crept to her chamber door and slid it open just a crack. The sight that met her eyes froze the blood in her veins. There, in her father's study across the courtyard, a familiar, tall figure was silhouetted against the lamplight. Li Wei. He was not supposed to be here. Not at this hour. In her first life, she had been fast asleep, oblivious. She watched, her breath caught in her throat, as he moved with a predator's grace. He went directly to her father's rosewood desk, bypassed the locked drawers with a clever, hidden mechanism she never knew existed, and drew out a stack of official documents. From within his sleeve, he produced another set of papers. With swift, practiced motions, he swapped them. He slid the new papers into the hidden compartment and replaced the original documents with the forgeries he had brought. Asterisk the treasonous letters. Asterisk the very ones that would be discovered by Imperial investigators tomorrow, sealing her family's fate. The memory of the execution platform, the smell of blood, the cold rain, the feel of the stone against her knees, it all crashed down on her with the force of a tidal wave. A wave of nausea and dizzying heat washed over her, and she had to clutch the doorframe to stay upright. This was not a dream. This was rebirth. The heavens had heard her vow. The initial, paralyzing shock began to recede, replaced by a sensation so cold it burned. It started in the pit of her stomach, a shard of absolute zero, and spread outwards, freezing the terror, numbing the grief, quenching the last flickering ember of the girl who had loved Li Wei. Her trembling stopped. Her breathing evened out. She watched him finish his work, her eyes dry and sharp, memorizing every detail, the way he checked the alignment of the seal, the faint smirk of satisfaction on his face, the precise fold of the forged documents. This was not the dashing prince of her dreams. This was the architect of her nightmare. He extinguished the lamp and slipped out of the study, a ghost in the moonlit night, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. Shenli remained at her door, long after he was gone. The courtyard was empty again, bathed in serene silver light. But she saw only the blood-soaked platform. She heard only the finality of the falling blade. She walked back to her dressing table and looked into the mirror once more. The same youthful face stared back, but the eyes were different. The innocence was gone, scorched away. In its place was a glacial calm, a depth of understanding that belonged to a soul that had already died once. A slow, deliberate smile touched her lips. It did not reach her eyes. "Welcome back, Shenli," she whispered to her reflection, her voice eerily steady. "He has made his first move. And now, it is my turn." She turned from the mirror, her silk robes whispering around her like a shroud. The game was afoot. And this time, she would not be a pawn. She would be the player who tipped the board. The first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of pearl and rose, but it brought no warmth to Shenli's chamber. The cold that had taken root in her soul during the night had not thawed. She moved through her morning ablutions with a mechanical precision, her maids, Inger and Yuer, chattering brightly about the day ahead, the new silks that had arrived, the upcoming chrysanthemum banquet. Their voices were like the distant chirping of sparrows, meaningless and faint. She offered them a faint, practiced smile, the one she had used for years to placate her mother's worries. It felt like a foreign mask on her skin. The girl who would have blushed and gossiped about the banquet was gone, her place taken by a strategist surveying a battlefield. "Inger," Shenli said, her voice calm. "Bring me the sandalwood chest from the back of the wardrobe." The maid bustled off and returned with the ornate chest. Inside, wrapped in silk, were her most treasured possessions from her past life, a bundle of love poems tied with a red ribbon, a painted fan Li Wei had given her, and a jade hairpin shaped like a lotus, his first gift. "Shall I prepare the lotus pin for today, my lady?" Yuer asked, eyeing the beautiful piece. "No," Shenli said, her tone leaving no room for question. She picked up the bundle of poems. "Fetch a brazier." The maids exchanged a confused glance but obeyed. Soon, a small bronze brazier glowed with hot coals in the center of her room. Shenli knelt before it, the poems in her hand. She untied the ribbon and unrolled the first scroll. The ink was faded, the words achingly familiar. "Your eyes are like the deepest lake, in which I willingly drown." She remembered the flush of joy she'd felt writing that. She remembered the clandestine thrill of slipping it into his hand. A fool's currency, traded for a kingdom of lies. Without a flicker of emotion on her face, she dropped the first poem onto the coals. The delicate paper blackened, curled, and vanished in a tiny flare of flame. "My lady!" Inger gasped. You cherished those. Shenli did not look up. She fed the second poem to the fire. Then the third. I cherished a ghost, she said, her voice flat. It is time to let phantoms rest. One by one, the evidence of her past folly was consumed. The fan followed, the painted scene of a pair of mandarin ducks blistering and turning to ash. Finally, she held the jade hairpin. It was cool and smooth in her palm, a piece of exquisite craftsmanship. In her first life, she had worn it until the day the Imperial Guards dragged her from this very room. She closed her fist around it, its edges biting into her skin. Then, with a final, decisive motion, she threw it into the heart of the fire. The jade did not burn, but it blackened and cracked with a sharp sound, its beauty destroyed. The maids were silent now, watching her with wide, fearful eyes. The act was too deliberate, too cold to be mere whimsy. It was a ritual. A severing. Now, Shenli said, brushing a non-existent speck of ash from her robe. Bring me my plainest blue robe. And Inger, I have an errand for you. An hour later, dressed in unadorned azure silk, her hair styled simply without a single hairpin, Shenli moved through the Shen manor like a wraith. Her destination was her father's study. The scene of the crime. The room smelled of old books and ink, a scent that had always been a comfort. Now, it felt tainted. She went straight to the rosewood desk. Her fingers, guided by the perfect, terrible memory of last night, found the hidden catch beneath a carved dragon's claw. A soft click, and a slender compartment slid open. There they were. The forged letters that declared her father, General Shen, was in treasonous correspondence with the northern barbarians, plotting to overthrow the emperor. She did not remove them. Touching them would risk leaving a trace, upsetting the careful balance of Li Wei's plot. She simply looked at them, committing the style of the script, the specific phrasing of the accusations to memory. She knew how this would unfold. The discovery would be made tomorrow by Censor Wang, a man deep in the crown prince's pocket. Her father would be taken into custody for questioning, and the slow, grinding wheels of the conspiracy would begin to turn. She could expose it now. She could take the letters to her father and tell him everything. And say what? A cold, logical voice whispered in her mind. Asterisk that I saw the crown prince in a dream? That I have lived this life before? He would think me hysterical, or worse, possessed. And if by some miracle he believed me, his honor would compel him to go directly to the emperor. Without proof of Li Wei's involvement, it would be our word against the crown prince's. A death sentence delivered faster. Asterisk no. Direct confrontation was a fool's gambit. She needed to undermine the foundation of the plot before the first stone was even laid. She needed to create ripples, to redirect the currents of power without ever revealing her own hand. She closed the hidden compartment and turned her attention to her father's main correspondence. She scanned the scrolls and missives, her mind, sharpened by hindsight, connecting names and events. One name caught her eye, Vice Minister Zhang, the Empress Dowager's favorite, a man known for his unshakable loyalty to her faction. In her first life, a scandal had broken about him weeks from now. He had been embezzling funds meant for the maintenance of the imperial mausoleums, a grave offense against filial piety. The evidence had been brought forward by a junior official seeking favor. The scandal had briefly weakened the Empress's faction and caused a minor stir. Shenli picked up a blank piece of paper and a common writing brush from a servant's desk. She would not write the full accusation. She would merely plant the seed. In a clumsy, disguised hand, she wrote a single, anonymous line asterisk Vice Minister Zhang's new country villa is far grander than his salary permits. The jade lions at its gate are particularly fine. Asterisk it was enough. The right ears would hear the whisper and investigate. It was a small act, a pinprick in the vast body of the court, but it would create a distraction. It would make the Empress Dowager's faction look vulnerable and sow a tiny seed of doubt about the integrity of officials close to the crown prince. Next, she needed a more powerful piece. Her thoughts turned to the northern frontier. In 2 months, a minor border commander, arrogant and eager for glory, would disobey orders and launch an unauthorized raid into barbarian territory. It would be a devastating ambush. Hundreds of loyal soldiers would be slaughtered, and the political fallout would be used by Li Wei to discredit the standing northern general and install his own man. But there was one man known for his incorruptible integrity and brilliant, unyielding command, General Xiao Chen, the Iron General. He was a neutral force, loyal only to the empire, not to any prince or faction. He was also, inconveniently for Li Wei, notoriously difficult to manipulate. Shenli took another sheet of paper. This message required more care. She chose her words with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. Asterisk to the guardian of the northern gate. Beware the viper in your nest. Commander Gao of the Black Tiger Fort plans a reckless strike beyond the Serpent's Pass, seeking glory but inviting slaughter. The order does not come from the Imperial War Council. He acts on a private promise. Asterisk she did not sign it. She rolled the two messages separately. Summoning Inger, she handed her the first. Take this to the tea house by the Ministry of Rights, she instructed. Leave it on a table and walk away. Do not be seen. Once Inger had gone, Shenli turned to the second, more critical message. This could not be traced back to her. She changed into a servant's plain cloak and slipped out through a side gate of the manor, melting into the bustling morning streets of the capital. She moved through the crowds, a nameless face among thousands. She made her way to the bustling courier station near the northern gate of the city, where merchants and soldiers sent missives to all corners of the empire. She paid a street urchin with a copper coin to take the scroll to the station master, specifying it was for the fastest military courier to the northern frontier, for General Xiao Chen's eyes only. She watched from the shadows as the urchin delivered the scroll. The deed was done. As she turned to leave, a contingent of imperial guards marched past, their armor gleaming. At their head, riding a magnificent black stallion, was Crown Prince Li Wei. He was laughing, his face radiant in the morning sun, the picture of noble virtue. Their eyes met for a fleeting second across the crowded street. There was no recognition in his gaze, only the casual indifference of a prince for a commoner in a cloak. Shenli did not flinch. She did not look away. She held his gaze for that single, heartbeat-long moment, her own eyes as flat and cold as the executioner's blade. Then, she turned and disappeared back into the flow of the city, a single, determined drop in the ocean, ready to become the tide that would wash his kingdom away. The first whispers of the Phoenix's revenge had been sent into the world. The chrysanthemum banquet was the pinnacle of autumnal glamour in the capital. The vast gardens of the imperial palace were transformed into a sea of gold, white, and purple blooms, their delicate fragrance mingling with the scent of fine wine and perfumed nobles. Silk-robed courtiers and jewel-bedecked ladies drifted between pavilions, their laughter as light and artificial as the music from the hidden ensemble. Shenli stood slightly apart from the main throng, near a gnarled old pine that offered a sliver of solitude. She was dressed in a gown of deep twilight blue, embroidered with a subtle pattern of silver cranes in flight. It was elegant, appropriate for her station, but deliberately muted against the peacock displays around her. Her only adornment was a single silver hairpin, its end shaped like a tiny, unbloomed bud. There were no jade lotuses, no fluttering hearts. Her armor, now, was one of quiet restraint. From her vantage point, she observed the chessboard of the court. She saw her father, General Shen, speaking with other military men, his brow slightly furrowed even in conversation. The anonymous note about Vice Minister Zhang had done its work, the air was thick with unspoken tension. The Empress Dowager's faction was on the defensive, and the Crown Prince's allies were moving with a new, careful vigilance. Her first ripple had been felt. And then she saw him. He did not make a grand entrance. He simply was there, a figure of stillness amidst the motion. General Xiao Chen. He stood near the edge of the martial pavilion, clad not in court silks but in a robe of dark gray, its cut severe and practical, reminiscent of a military uniform without being one. He wore no jewelry, no ornate guan. His hands were clasped behind his back, and his gaze swept slowly across the gathering, missing nothing. He was not tall and flamboyantly handsome like Li Wei, his presence was more solid, like a mountain that had been there long before the palace was built. It was a presence that commanded silence, not applause. This was the man to whom she had sent her warning. The Iron General. In her first life, she had known him only by fearsome reputation, the man who had held the northern frontier against impossible odds, a strategist whose mind was said to be as impenetrable as the Great Wall. Seeing him now, she felt a flicker of cold satisfaction. Her message had been a test, and his very presence here, alive and unentangled in the coming disaster, was its first return. As if feeling the weight of her observation, his sharp, dark eyes turned and found hers across the distance. There was no polite curiosity in his gaze, no casual appraisal of a noble lady's beauty. It was a look of pure assessment, analytical and penetrating. It was the look a general gives a strange fortification on a map, calculating its strengths, its weaknesses, its purpose. He did not look away, and neither did she. For a long moment, they simply held the stare, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He saw the woman who had sent the warning. She saw the man who had heeded it. The spell was broken by a voice dripping with honeyed charm. Shenli. You are like a solitary blossom, hiding its beauty from the sun. Crown Prince Li Wei materialized beside her, a practiced smile on his flawless face. He was resplendent in gold-embroidered white silk, a living embodiment of the dynasty's glory. In her past life, this moment, his seeking her out, his poetic flattery, would have sent her heart soaring. Now, it felt like a snake slithering over her foot. She turned to him, her face a placid mask. She offered the shallow, formal bow required of her station. Your Highness honors me with your attention. His smile widened, but his eyes were probing. You have been distant lately, Li. I have missed our conversations in the library. He took a step closer, his voice lowering intimately. I heard a troubling rumor. They say you burned your poetry. Such a pity. They were quite heartfelt. The threat was veiled, but present. He was reminding her of the power he held over her, the evidence of her past devotion that could now be used to mock her. He was testing the waters, trying to understand the change in her. Shenli met his gaze, her own utterly calm. Youthful follies, Your Highness. As the saying goes, one must clear the withered branches to allow for new growth. She gestured lightly towards the chrysanthemums. I find my interests now lie in things of more enduring substance. A flicker of irritation crossed his features before being smoothed away. Enduring substance? Like the tedious reports on northern grain yields your father is so fond of? I saw you reading them earlier. He chuckled, a condescending sound. A strange pastime for a flower of the court. A stable north means a stable empire, does it not, Your Highness? She replied, her tone neutral. I find the foundations of our peace more fascinating than its decorations. Li Wei's smile tightened. He was not getting the reaction he wanted. There was no blushing denial, no flustered explanation. There was only this infuriating, placid composure. He was used to being the sun around which all planets orbited, but she had suddenly ceased to reflect his light. Indeed, he said, his voice losing some of its warmth. Though a woman's mind is a delicate thing. Too much substance can be a burden. He gave her a final, searching look. Do not let your new interests make you forget the beauty of simpler pleasures. With a nod that was almost a dismissal, he moved away, back into the adoring crowd that instantly enveloped him. Shenli released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The interaction had been a skirmish, and she had held her ground. But it was exhausting. The effort of maintaining the mask, of biting back the vitriol that rose in her throat, was a constant drain. He believes a caged songbird should only sing the songs it is taught. The voice was low, resonant, and came from just behind her right shoulder. She turned, and found herself looking up at General Xiaochen. He had approached without a sound. Her heart gave a single, hard thump against her ribs. Up close, he was even more imposing. His features were sharp, carved from wind and weather, and a faint, pale scar bisected his left eyebrow. His eyes, which had seemed dark from a distance, were a shade of deep amber, and they held no mockery, only that same unnerving directness. General Xiao, she said, her voice thankfully steady. She bowed again, deeper this time, in respect for his rank and achievements. He acknowledged it with a slight incline of his head. Lady Shen. His gaze flickered in the direction Li Wei had gone. It is a rare songbird that seeks to read the map of its cage. The metaphor was so close to her own thoughts it was unsettling. Perhaps the bird has grown tired of singing and wishes to understand the world beyond the bars, she countered quietly. A look that might have been the ghost of amusement touched his eyes. It was there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. A dangerous wish. The world beyond the bars is full of hawks and storms. And yet, it is the real world, Shenli replied, holding his gaze. Is it not better to see the hawk coming than to be snatched from a gilded perch by surprise? For a long moment, he was silent, his amber eyes studying her face as if deciphering a complex battle report. He saw the intelligence there, the resolve, the complete absence of the vapid courtly maiden she was supposed to be. The message I received, he said abruptly, his voice dropping so only she could hear. It was precise. It spoke of a specific fort, a specific pass. It lacked a signature, but it carried the weight of certain knowledge. Xunli's blood ran cold, but she did not look away. This was the precipice. A loyal subject of the empire need not sign a warning against its enemies, General. The result is signature enough. She saw the calculation in his eyes. He was connecting the dots, the anonymous message, her father's position, her own sudden transformation from a besotted girl into this entity. He did not have the full picture, but he knew she was a piece on the board, and a significant one. The result was the preservation of 500 loyal soldiers and the integrity of our northern border, he said finally. For that, the Empire owes a debt. He paused, his gaze intensifying. Knowledge is a weapon, Lady Xin. A double-edged one. I hope you wield it with care. Before she could formulate a response, a court official announced the beginning of the poetry competition. The moment was broken. Xiaochen gave her one last, unreadable look, then turned and melted back into the crowd, his gray robe making him seem like a shadow among the bright silks. Xunli stood rooted to the spot, her mind racing. He knew. Not everything, but enough. He had not threatened her, nor had he exposed her. Instead, he had offered a tacit acknowledgement. An alliance, however fragile, had been proposed in that single, charged exchange. As the flowery verses began to fill the air, praising the chrysanthemums and the emperor's virtue, Xunli looked at the generals retreating back. He was a hawk, yes. But he was not her hawk. He was a power, a force of nature. And for the first time since her rebirth, she felt not alone. The game had just gained another player, and the stakes had risen immeasurably. The Imperial Library was a sanctuary of silence and dust motes dancing in slanted sunbeams. Towering shelves of dark cedar groaned under the weight of centuries, scrolls on astronomy, treatises on statecraft, military manuals, and poetic anthologies. It was a place Xunli had rarely visited in her first life, finding its solemnity oppressive. Now, it was her arsenal. She stood in an aisle dedicated to regional histories, her fingers tracing the worn leather spine of a volume on the economic policies of the previous dynasty. This was her alibi, her cover. But her true objective lay further down, in the section on law and military jurisprudence. The encounter with General Xiao at the banquet had been a catalyst. His tacit acknowledgement had been a shield, but it was not a sword. She needed a sword. She needed a plan so concrete, so unassailable, that when the Hawkwood strike came, her counter would not merely defend, but cripple. She found the text she was looking for, Precedents of Imperial Judgment, Volume 7. It contained the records of a similar, though less severe, case of embezzlement from 50 years prior. The legal arguments used then could be adapted now. As she reached for it, a shadow fell across the shelf. The legalist school. A harsh mistress. She did not need to turn. The voice, low and resonant, was already becoming familiar. General Xiaochen stood beside her, his gaze on the same volume. He was, as ever, dressed with severe simplicity, looking more like a scholar who had seen battle than a general who frequented libraries. Harsh, but necessary, General, Xunli replied, pulling the heavy tome from the shelf. Laws are the bones of an empire. Without them, it is merely a formless body, prone to corruption and decay. A sentiment my father would have approved of, a new, oily voice interjected. Xunli's spine stiffened. Lord Lin, a mid-level official whose loyalty was conveniently, and expensively, purchased by House Hawkwood, smiled at them. He was a weasel of a man, all insincere smiles and darting eyes. General Xiao. An honor to find you here, Lin fawned, bowing deeply. And Lady Xin. Delving into the dry texts of law? How unusual. His eyes flickered between them, sensing an opportunity. Though perhaps not so unusual. The general is known for his strategic mind, and the lady, well, the lady seems full of surprises lately. The implication was clear, he was noting their proximity, a potential scandal to be reported back to his master. Xiao Chen's expression did not change, but a frost seemed to emanate from him. The Lady Shen's intellectual pursuits are a credit to her house, he stated, his tone flat and final. It is the duty of all nobles to understand the principles that govern the realm they benefit from. Do you not agree, Lord Lin? The rebuke was polite but unmistakable. Lord Lin's smile faltered. Of course, of course. I merely meant, it is a rare focus for one so young. He bowed again, hastily. I will not disturb your studies further. He scurried away, but the damage was done. The encounter was a reminder that they were constantly watched. Any further conversation here was too risky. Shenli met Xiao Chen's gaze. The unspoken understanding from the banquet passed between them again. He had shielded her, but the shield had its limits. The air in here is somewhat stale, do you not think, General? Shenli said, her voice barely above a whisper. I find the archives in the Pavilion of Autumn Frost to be more conducive to clear thought. They are particularly well stocked on Northern territorial law. It was a gamble. The Pavilion of Autumn Frost was a smaller, rarely used library annex on the palace grounds, known for its collection of obscure legal and historical documents. Xiao Chen's amber eyes held hers for a moment, assessing the move. He gave a curt nod. I have heard the same. I was meaning to consult their maps of the Serpent's Pass. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving her with the heavy legal text. Her heart thumped a frantic rhythm. This was no longer a game of anonymous notes. This was a clandestine meeting. An hour later, Shenli sat at a worn wooden table in the silent, sun-drenched Pavilion of Autumn Frost. The only sounds were the rustle of pages and the distant call of a pheasant from the gardens. She had spread out several scrolls, creating a convincing tableau of scholarly research. The door slid open silently. Xiao Chen entered, his frame filling the doorway. He closed it behind him, and the room seemed to shrink, the air thickening with unspoken consequence. He did not sit. He stood by the table, his gaze sweeping over her notes, not the legal texts, but the neat, coded columns of numbers and names she had been compiling from memory. A list of Hawkwood-affiliated merchants, dates of suspicious shipments, amounts of silver that did not match official records. You are preparing for a war, he stated, his voice low. I am fortifying against a siege, General, she corrected, not looking up. The first assault will be an accusation of embezzling military funds. It will happen soon. He was silent for a long moment. How can you be certain? This was the precipice. She could not speak of rebirth. She chose a half-truth woven from foresight. The same way I knew of Commander Gao's folly. I have ears, and I know how to listen. House Hawkwood is over-leveraged. Their expenses on private armies and bribes far outstrip their official income. They need a large, immediate infusion of silver, and they need a scapegoat. My father's integrity and his control of the western supply routes make him the perfect target. She finally looked up at him. They will use a forged ledger. I know the man who will discover it. I know the official who forged it. Xiao Chen's eyes narrowed. Then expose the forger now. And start a war we cannot win with a single skirmish? Shenli shook her head, a bitter smile on her lips. He is a minor player. He would confess, take the blame, and the Hawkwoods would simply find another. It would only make them more cautious. We must let the plot unfold. We must allow the accusation to be made publicly. That is a dangerous gamble, Lady Shin. The court of public opinion is often the first and most decisive battlefield. Which is why we must be prepared to win it, she said, her voice gaining intensity. She tapped her notes. I am recreating the true ledger from memory. My father is meticulous. I have spent my life in his household, I know the flow of our finances. I can replicate it. She met his gaze, her own blazing with a cold fire. But a ledger I create alone will be dismissed as a daughter's desperate fabrication. I need more. What do you need? The question was direct, a general assessing the resources required for a campaign. 2 things, she said, holding up a finger. First, I need you to use your influence, discreetly, to ensure the trial is held before the full imperial censorate, not a closed military tribunal. We need an audience. We need witnesses. Xiao Chen nodded slowly. That can be arranged. The chief censor owes my family a debt. And the second? Shenli took a deep breath. This was the greater ask. The forger is a man named Clerk Bao. He is greedy and vain. He keeps a private journal, a record of every bribe he has ever taken and for whom, to protect himself. It is hidden in a false bottom of a chest in his lover's house in the Western Market District. Xiao Chen's eyebrow rose slightly. The depth of her knowledge was clearly unsettling. You ask me to commit a crime. Burglary. I ask you to uncover the truth, she countered. The journal is the key. With it, we can not only prove the ledger is a forgery, but we can trace the order directly back to the Hawkwood steward, and from there, the implication leads to the Crown Prince himself. It turns a defense into a devastating counterattack. The room was silent. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes that danced between them like tiny specks of fate. Xiaochen studied her, the fierce determination in her eyes, the absolute conviction in her plan. He saw not a vengeful girl, but a commander laying out a brilliant, if ruthless, strategy. You would risk your father's temporary disgrace, his imprisonment, for the chance to destroy the enemy completely, he mused, a trace of respect in his voice. My father's honor is not so fragile that it cannot withstand a few days of slander, Shinli said, her voice softening for the first time. But his life, and the lives of everyone in my clan, are. This is the only way. Xiaochen straightened up. The decision was made. I will have the journal, he said, his tone leaving no doubt. And the trial will be before the censorate. Relief, so profound it made her knees weak, flooded through her. She had an ally. A true ally. Thank you, General, she whispered. He looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, the intensity in his amber eyes was not that of a strategist, but of a man looking at a woman who had utterly confounded his expectations. Do not thank me yet, Lady Shin. We have merely drawn the battle lines. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. The next time we meet, he said without looking back, it will likely be in that courtroom. Be ready. Then he was gone, leaving Shinli alone in the silent pavilion, the weight of the coming storm feeling, for the first time, like something she could not only weather, but command. The western garden of the Shin Manor had always been Anya's sanctuary. In spring, the peach trees erupted in a riot of delicate pink blossoms, their fleeting beauty a subject of countless poems. It was here, under the very same gnarled boughs now heavy with ripening fruit, that Crown Prince Li Wei had first taken her hand. He had quoted a line about blossoms falling like whispered promises, and her 16-year-old heart had been irrevocably lost. Now, standing in that same spot, Shinli felt nothing but the cool, smooth skin of a late-harvest peach in her palm. She had plucked it herself, her movements economical and precise. The memory was a phantom limb, she knew it had once been there, ached with the ghost of its presence, but it was no longer a part of her. The past week had been a study in controlled tension. Her father had noticed a new, grim purpose in her, a stillness that he mistook for maturity. She had spent her days in a pantomime of normalcy, all while her mind churned, rehearsing the courtroom defense, visualizing the moment the forged ledger would be presented. The alliance with General Xiao was a secret fire she carried inside, warming her with its potential but threatening to consume her if mishandled. A commotion at the garden's moon gate announced the arrival of the afternoon's guests. It was an informal gathering, a prelude to the larger Mid-Autumn festival, hosted by her mother to maintain social appearances. And, as she had known he would, Crown Prince Li Wei was among them, the sun around which the entire party immediately began to orbit. He was in his element, dispensing charming smiles and witty remarks, his gaze occasionally sweeping the garden, searching. It landed on her, isolated by the peach tree, and a satisfied smile touched his lips. He excused himself from a cluster of fawning nobles and began to make his way toward her, his approach as deliberate as a hunter's. Shenli did not move. She continued to examine the peach in her hand, its blush of red and gold a small, perfect universe. Shenli, he said, his voice a warm, intimate caress designed for this very setting. You are hiding again. Though this spot holds such fond memories for us, does it not? He came to stand beside her, so close she could smell the sandalwood on his robes. He looked up at the tree, a nostalgic smile playing on his lips. I remember it clearly. The blossoms were falling like pink snow. You were so shy, your cheeks the color of the petals themselves. He turned his gaze on her, full of practiced tenderness. You told me your heart was mine. In her first life, this would have been the moment her resolve crumbled. This was his power, the ability to resurrect a ghost and make it feel real. Shinli finally lifted her eyes to his. They were not the eyes of a blushing girl. They were the calm, deep pools of the execution ground, reflecting his image back at him without warmth or recognition. The past is a country I no longer visit, Your Highness, she said, her tone as cool and smooth as jade. Memories, like blossoms, are beautiful but destined to fall and rot. It is the fruit that remains which holds true value. She gestured slightly with the peach in her hand. Li Wei's smile tightened. The script was not being followed. The fruit can be bitter, literally. Without the sweet memory of the blossom to give it context, what is it but sustenance? A common thing. A necessary thing, she countered, meeting his gaze squarely. Blossoms feed the soul, but fruit feeds the body. An empire runs on grain and steel, not on poetry and fallen petals. I find I have developed a taste for more substantive fare. A flicker of genuine anger crossed his face, quickly masked. He was a man who dealt in illusions, of love, of loyalty, of his own virtue. Her refusal to participate in his fantasy was a direct threat. Substance, he repeated, a sharp edge entering his voice. Is that what you call your sudden fascination with ledgers and law? It is unseemly. People are talking. They say the Shin daughter has grown cold, strange. They whisper that a woman who abandons the gentle arts for the brutal ones has lost her way. He took a step closer, his voice dropping, laced with a threat that was no longer veiled. You are making a spectacle of yourself. And in doing so, you risk dragging your family's name through the mud you seem so fascinated by. This was the pivot. From charm to coercion. This was the man who had condemned her clan to death. Shenli did not flinch. She held the peach up between them, as if examining it against the light, a barrier of simple, unadorned reality. The only mud I see, Your Highness, is the kind that sticks to the boots of those who traffic in forgeries and lies in the dark. Her voice was soft, but every word was a shard of ice. The girl who loved you among these blossoms is gone. She died on a rainy day, her family's blood staining the stones. I am what remains. Not her memory, not her ghost. I am her vengeance. The color drained from Li Wei's face. It was not a confession he could understand, but the raw, unadulterated hatred in her eyes was unmistakable. It was a look that saw through his royal robes and handsome face to the rotten core beneath. For the first time, he was not looking at a pawn, but at an enemy. You are mad, he hissed, his composure finally cracking. Am I? She gave a small, chilling smile. Then you would be wise to stay out of a madwoman's way. She didn't wait for a response. She turned her back on him, a profound and deliberate insult to the crown prince. She walked away, not in a flurry of anger, but with a slow, deliberate pace that was infinitely more dismissive. She walked toward the main party, leaving him standing alone under the peach tree, the ghost of his own manipulation staring back at him. As she rejoined the crowd, her heart was not racing with fear or exhilaration. It beat a steady, cold rhythm. She had drawn a line in the soil of the garden, and he had been the one to step back. From across the lawn, near a stand of elegant bamboo, a pair of amber eyes had witnessed the entire exchange. General Xiao Chen, who had arrived late and unobtrusively, had seen the crown prince's approach, seen Shenli's unwavering posture, seen the moment the prince's charm turned to venom, and seen her turn her back on him. He made no move to approach her. There was no nod, no smile. But as his gaze followed her, calm and resolute amidst the chattering courtiers, a look of grim approval settled on his features. The songbird had not just left its cage, it had bared its talons. Shenli felt his gaze like a physical touch, a steadying hand on her shoulder in the storm she had just unleashed. She did not look at him, but a sense of profound rightness settled over her. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time, she was walking it with her eyes wide open, no longer haunted by the ghost of a blossom, but armed with the hard pit of truth. The game was now in the open, and the first, crucial move had been hers. The hall of impartial judgment was never impartial. It was a theater, and today, it was packed to the gilded rafters. The air hummed with the whispers of 100 court officials, their colorful silks a stark contrast to the grim purpose of the gathering. The case of General Shen's alleged embezzlement of military funds was not just a trial, it was the opening salvo in a war everyone sensed but few understood. Shenli stood slightly behind and to the left of her father, who knelt before the dais of the imperial censorate. General Shen's back was ramrod straight, his face a mask of stoic dignity, but she could see the fine tremor in his clasped hands. He was a man of the battlefield, not the courtroom, and the stench of this political ambush offended his every principle. From his position of privilege to the right of the chief censor, Crown Prince Li Wei observed the proceedings with an expression of pained disappointment. The perfect prince, burdened by the failings of a trusted subordinate. His gaze occasionally flickered to Shenli, a cold, smug promise in his eyes. This is your doing, it seemed to say. Asterisk your defiance has brought this upon them. Asterisk Shenli met his gaze only once, her own as unreadable as still water, before returning her attention to the chief censor. General Xiao Chen's influence had worked, the full censorate was present, a sea of solemn faces. The audience was secured. The Hawkwood faction's attack began with Censor Wang, a man whose jowly face was perpetually slick with a sheen of nervous sweat. He stepped forward, his voice ringing with manufactured outrage. Esteemed censors, the evidence is irrefutable. He held aloft a ledger. This, discovered in the private study of General Shen, details the systematic diversion of funds meant for our brave soldiers at the frontier. Funds for grain, for armor, for the very arrows that defend our borders, siphoned into the coffers of House Shen. A wave of gasps and murmurs swept the hall. Censor Wang presented the ledger to the chief censor, who examined it with a frown. It was a convincing forgery. The paper, the ink, even the style of script mimicked the Shen household accounts perfectly. Li Wei's smirk deepened. General Shen's voice, though steady, held a tremor of fury. That document is a lie. I have never seen it before in my life. And that, General, is what every guilty man says. Censor Wang retorted triumphantly. The proof is here, in your own hand. It was the moment Shenli had been waiting for. The trap was sprung. Now, it was time to spring her own. She took a single, graceful step forward and bowed deeply to the dais. Honored censors. If I may? All eyes turned to her. A woman, speaking in a military trial? It was unprecedented. Scandalous. Li Wei's eyes narrowed in warning, but the chief censor, perhaps out of curiosity or at a prior, unspoken suggestion from a certain general, nodded curtly. Speak, Lady Shen. But be brief. Thank you, Your Honor. Her voice was clear and carried effortlessly in the silent hall. Censor Wang claims that ledger is in my father's hand. Yet, my father, a military man, has always kept his financial records in the standard clerical script, for clarity and ease of audit by the Ministry of Revenue. She turned to Censor Wang. The ledger you hold, may I draw your attention to the character 4 grain on the third line? And the character 4 silver on the seventh? Censor Wang blinked, thrown by the specific question. What of them? My father, Shinli continued, her tone that of a scholar explaining a simple text, suffers from an old wrist injury sustained at the Battle of Black River. He has not been able to execute the delicate, turning flourish at the end of those specific characters for over a decade. His brush always lifts prematurely, leaving a blunt end. The forger of this document, while skilled, was not aware of this personal detail. The characters in this ledger have perfect, elegant flourishes. A fresh wave of whispers, this time tinged with interest, rippled through the hall. The chief censor picked up the ledger, peering closely at the characters she had indicated. Li Wei's smugness had vanished, replaced by a cold stillness. A compelling observation, Lady Shen, the chief censor allowed. But it is, as you say, a personal detail. It suggests the document may be a forgery, but it does not prove your father's innocence, nor does it provide us with the truth. The truth, Your Honor, Shenli said, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild bird, lies in the real ledger. She produced a scroll from her sleeve. It was not the original, that was surely destroyed, but her own meticulous recreation, compiled from weeks of painstaking work, cross-referenced with her childhood memories of household accounts and the official records she had studied in the library. This, she declared, unfurling it with a steady hand, is a true copy of the Shen household's military disbursements for the period in question. Every string of cash, every sack of grain, is accounted for and matches the records held at the Ministry of Revenue. There are no discrepancies. Censor Wang scoffed, recovering slightly. A copy? Made by the accused's own daughter? This is worthless. Is it? A new voice cut through the hall, deep and authoritative. General Xiaochen stepped forward from the crowd of observers. He had been a silent statue until now, but his presence immediately commanded attention. He held up a small, leather-bound book. This, he said, his voice resonating in the sudden silence, was retrieved from the residence of a man named Clerk Bao, a known forger in the employ of the Hawkwood steward. It details his payments, his instructions, and his creative endeavors. Xiao Chen's amber eyes swept over the stunned censorate before landing squarely on Censor Wang. Including a specific, well-paid commission to create a persuasive financial record for the Shen household, based on a template provided by your own office, Censor Wang. The silence in the hall was absolute. You could have heard a hairpin drop. Censor Wang went pale as death. Lies. Slander. That is a stolen, it is evidence, Xiaochen interrupted, his tone final. Of a conspiracy to falsely accuse a loyal general and undermine the stability of the empire. The journal names names. It traces a path of silver and deceit that leads directly to the heart of this plot. He didn't look at Li Wei. He didn't need to. The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The crown prince sat perfectly still, his face a carefully controlled mask, but a muscle twitched violently in his jaw. His plan had not just failed, it had backfired catastrophically. The weapon he had meant to destroy the Shins had been turned against his own faction. The chief censor's face was thunderous. Censor Wang. You will explain yourself. Guards, seize him. As the guards moved forward, the hall erupted into chaos. Accusations flew, alliances were mentally recalculated on the spot. Through the tumult, Shenli's eyes met General Zhao's. It was not a look of triumph, but of grim acknowledgement. They had won the battle. The first, crucial victory. Her father was safe, his honor not just restored but burnished by the public exposure of the conspiracy against him. But as she looked at Li Wei's frozen, furious form, she knew the war was far from over. He had been humiliated, his power checked. A cornered hawk was the most dangerous kind. Her father turned to her, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, relief, and a dawning, profound respect. He had not understood her strange behavior these past weeks. Now, he did. Shenli allowed herself a single, slow breath. The unfurled scroll had been her defense. But the next move would require a sharper blade. The game was escalating, and the stakes were now nothing less than the throne itself. The silence in the Shen family carriage on the ride home was a physical presence, thick and heavy with unspoken questions. General Shen sat opposite his daughter, his broad shoulders slumped not in defeat, but in the profound exhaustion that follows a narrowly averted catastrophe. He watched Shenli, who sat perfectly composed, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the passing cityscape outside the window. She looked like a statue carved from moonlight, beautiful and untouchable. He had tried to speak, to ask the questions burning in his throat. Asterisk, how did you know? When did you learn to do this? What have you become? Asterisk, but the words died before they could form. The sight of his daughter, cool and precise as a master strategist, systematically dismantling the crown. Prince's plot in the heart of the imperial court, had stolen his voice. This was not the girl he had raised. This was a general who had just won her first major campaign. When they arrived at the manor, Shenli moved with the same unnerving calm. She dismissed the frantic, tearful inquiries of her mother with a gentle but firm assurance that all was well. She instructed the stewards to see to her father's needs, her voice quiet but brooking no argument. Then, she retreated to the one place that had always been hers, the small, secluded library in the western wing. Only when the door slid shut behind her did the facade crack. The tremors started in her hands, a fine, violent shaking that she could no longer control. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the trial, that had sharpened her mind and steadied her voice, deserted her all at once, leaving her hollow and trembling. She stumbled to a low divan, her legs giving way. The image of Censor Wang's ashen face, the sound of the chief censor's thunderous verdict, the cold, murderous fury in Li Wei's eyes, it all crashed down upon her. She had done it. She had changed fate. Her father was safe. Her house stood. But the cost was a terror so deep it felt like a void opening inside her. She had stared into the abyss of imperial power and not only survived, but struck back. The recklessness of it, the sheer, terrifying scale of what she had undertaken, finally overwhelmed her. She pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob that was part relief, part sheer, undiluted panic. It was in this state of unguarded vulnerability that a soft knock came at the door. Before she could compose herself, it slid open. General Xiaochen stood there. He had not waited for an announcement. He must have followed their carriage, his purpose too urgent for protocol. He took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance, the solitary figure on the divan, the slender shoulders trembling, the face usually so composed now pale and strained. He did not speak. He closed the door and crossed the room with his silent, predatory grace, kneeling on the floor before her so that his eyes were level with hers. "It is the aftermath," he said, his voice low and devoid of pity. It was a simple statement of fact. The battle is won, and the body remembers the fear it would not acknowledge in the fight. Shenli tried to speak, to offer some defiant, coherent thought, but all that escaped was a ragged breath. She hated this weakness, this betrayal of her own body. I am not afraid, she managed, the lie brittle and transparent. Yes, you are, he countered, his amber eyes holding hers, not with judgment, but with a deep, unsettling understanding. You should be. Only a fool faces what you face today without fear. Courage is not the absence of fear, Lady Shin. It is the decision that something else is more important. Today, your father's life was more important. Your clan's honor was more important. His words were a balm, not because they soothed, but because they acknowledged the truth. He did not offer empty comfort. He offered shared burden. The weight of command is this, he continued, his gaze unwavering. The knowledge that your decisions, your strategies, determine whether people live or die. It is a cold and heavy mantle. You wore it today. It is no surprise that you feel its chill now. He reached into his robe and drew forth a long, slender object wrapped in plain, undyed silk. He placed it in her lap. It was heavy for its size. I told you knowledge was a weapon, he said. But even the most brilliant strategist can be cornered. With trembling fingers, Shenli unwrapped the cloth. Nestled inside was a dagger. It was utterly unadorned, its scabbard and hilt made of a dark, age-smoothed wood. There was no jade, no gold, no intricate carvings. It was a tool, pure and simple. She drew the blade. It was a single, fluid piece of folded steel, honed to an edge that seemed to drink the light, its surface showing the subtle, wave-like pattern of masterful craftsmanship. It is not a jewel, Xiaochen said, watching her face. It will not flatter you or adorn you. It is your last resort. A general must always have one. It is better to grasp this in your own hand than to have enemies at your throat. She looked from the deadly, beautiful simplicity of the blade to his face. This was not a romantic gift. It was something far more profound. It was an acknowledgement of her as an equal in a war they were now both fighting. It was a testament to his respect for her will to survive. He was not giving a lady a trinket, he was arming an ally. Her trembling began to subside. The solid, cool weight of the dagger in her hand was an anchor in the storm of her emotions. This was real. This was power she could hold. A private promise, she whispered, the phrase from her first warning to him returning to her. You believe the Crown Prince will resort to more direct methods now. A public defeat makes a man desperate, Xiaochen replied, his voice grim. And desperate men abandon subtlety. He will not try another forgery. The next attack will be swifter, sharper. Perhaps a bandit attack on a journey. An accident in a crowded street. He will seek to break what he cannot bend. Shenli closed her fingers around the wooden hilt. The fit was perfect. Then we must be ready. We will be, he said. He rose to his feet, his gaze lingering on her. The vulnerability was gone from her face, replaced by a resolute calm. The weapon had done its work, not as a tool of violence, but as a symbol of agency. Thank you, General, she said, her voice steady once more. He nodded, a silent understanding passing between them that needed no further words. He had seen her broken, and he had not offered a shoulder to cry on, but a blade to wield. It was the greatest respect he could have shown her. After he left, Shenli sat for a long time, the dagger resting across her palms. The icy fortitude she had cultivated since her rebirth had shattered in the aftermath of the trial, but what was reforming in its place was different. It was not just cold resolve anymore. It was tempered steel, forged in the fire of shared purpose and hardened by the respect of a man who saw not a victim, but a partner. The heart siege was over. The walls still stood, but now, they had a gate. And she held the key. The victory in the hall of impartial judgment was a pyre that burned bright and fast, leaving behind not warm embers, but a landscape scorched of illusions. The Hawkwood faction was wounded, not dead. Censor Wang had conveniently, and permanently, silenced himself in his cell before he could name higher masters. The official story became one of a rogue official's vendetta, a narrative that allowed the Crown Prince to maintain a veneer of shocked innocence while his power base quietly convulsed. In the days that followed, a brittle calm settled over the capital. For Shenli, it was the tense silence before a storm. She knew Li Wei too well. Humiliation was a poison he would not swallow. He would counterattack, and it would not be with ledgers this time. The invitation arrived on a morning veiled in thin, grey mist. It was not from the Crown Prince, but from the Empress Dowager herself. A summons to the Palace of Eternal Spring for a private tea ceremony. The parchment was scented with a rare, cloying incense, and the characters were brushed with an old woman's precise, unyielding hand. It was a trap. Shunli knew it with every fiber of her being. The Empress Dowager had lost a valuable piece in Censor Wang. This was her move to assess the new player on the board, and to eliminate her if necessary. "You cannot go," her father said, his voice gruff with a fear he could no longer hide. He stood in her chamber, the invitation crumpled in his fist. "It is a snake's nest. She will find a way to discredit you, or worse. If I refuse, she will discredit us anyway," Shunli replied, her voice calm as she selected a robe of unassuming dove gray. "A refusal would be interpreted as guilt, or arrogance. We are in a war of perception now, father. I must go. I must look the snake in the eye." She met his worried gaze, her own steady. "General Shao has men watching the palace. I will not be entirely alone." The Palace of Eternal Spring was a world of muted opulence. Where the main halls shouted with gold and vermilion, this place whispered with jade and pearl. The air was thick with the scent of medicinal herbs and the profound silence of absolute power. The Empress Dowager sat on a raised dais, a tiny, wizened figure swathed in layers of dark silk, her hands like bird claws resting on her knees. Her eyes, however, were ancient and sharp, missing nothing. "So, you are the one," the old woman said, her voice a dry rustle. She did not invite Shinli to sit. "The little songbird who has learned to peck out eyes. Come closer. Let me see what all the fuss is about." Shinli approached and knelt, performing the full kowtow with flawless grace. "This unworthy one is honored by your majesty's attention." "Are you?" The Empress Dowager's lips stretched into a thin smile. "Or do you merely play the part, as you played the lovesick fool for my grandson?" She gestured to a low table where a simple celadon tea set was arranged. Pour. It was a test. A command. To refuse was insult. To obey was to partake. Shunli rose and knelt at the table. Her movements were fluid, practiced. She had studied the tea ceremony for years, a pursuit she had once found tedious but now understood as another form of combat, a battle of stillness, precision, and hidden intention. As she heated the water, measured the tea leaves, and poured the first infusion, she was acutely aware of the Empress's gaze on her, weighing, probing. "You have caused my family a great deal of trouble, child," the Empress said conversationally. "That little performance in the censorate, very dramatic. But you have upset the balance of the court. The garden is meant to be orderly. You are a weed, pushing through the carefully arranged peonies." "A weed is merely a plant whose use has not yet been recognized, Your Majesty," Shinli replied, her eyes on the steam rising from the teapot. A dry chuckle. "Brave words. Or foolish ones?" The Empress accepted the small teacup Shinli offered. She did not drink. Instead, she nodded to an attendant, who brought forward a small, exquisitely carved sandalwood box. "A gift. For your resilience." Shinli's every instinct screamed a warning. She opened the box. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, lay a hairpin. It was a masterwork, a pair of phoenixes wrought in gold, their wings encrusted with rubies and their eyes formed from tiny, piercing black pearls. It was breathtaking. And it was a declaration. The phoenix was a symbol of the Empress herself. "It is too generous, Your Majesty," Shinli said, bowing her head. "I am not worthy of such an honor." "Nonsense," the Empress rasped. "I insist. Put it on. Let me see how it looks." It was a command. To refuse was impossible. With hands that wanted to tremble but did not, Shinli lifted the pin. It was heavy, cold. As she slid it into her hair, she felt a faint, unnatural warmth emanate from the rubies. A poison? A tracking charm? She did not know, but the intent was malevolent. Just then, the door to the pavilion slid open. General Shaochen stood there, his presence a shock of cold, clean air in the perfumed room. He must have used his considerable influence to bypass the outer guards. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing with rigid formality. "Forgive the intrusion. I bring an urgent message from the northern frontier for the Emperor. I saw Lady Shin here and recalled a matter of military logistics her father had asked me to discuss with her. With your permission, I will escort her out so as not to disturb your tranquility." The Empress Dowager's eyes narrowed to slits. The interruption was a blatant challenge. She looked from Xiao Chen's unyielding face to Shinli, the phoenix pin gleaming in her hair. The logistics of the north are so pressing they cannot wait, she asked, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. The stability of the empire rests on such details, Your Majesty, Xiaochen replied, his tone neutral. As you well know. A long, taut silence stretched between them. The old empress knew she was checkmated. To deny him would be to openly declare her hostility, something she could not afford with a man of Xiaochen's standing. Very well, she said at last, waving a dismissive hand. Take your logistics. But remember, child, she added, her eyes locking with Shenli's, a gift from the empress is a permanent attachment. It would be a grave misfortune to lose it. The threat was clear. The pin was not just a marker, it was a shackle. Shenli cowed out again, her mind racing. As she rose to leave, Xiaochen's hand shot out, not to her, but to the teacup she had poured for the empress. In a move so swift it was almost invisible, he lifted it. A fine brew. It would be a shame to waste it, he said, and before anyone could react, he drained the cup. Shenli's heart stopped. The empress's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in fury. Xiaochen placed the empty cup back on the table with a soft click. His face was impassive, but a bead of sweat already traced a path down his temple. My thanks for the tea, Your Majesty. We take our leave. He turned and strode from the pavilion, Shenli following numbly behind. They walked in silence through the winding palace corridors, his steps firm and steady, but she could see the tension in the line of his shoulders. Once they were in her family's carriage, rattling away from the palace, the facade crumbled. Xiaochen slumped against the seat, his face ashen. A trickle of dark blood escaped the corner of his mouth. You fool. Shenli whispered, her voice cracking with a terror she had never felt for herself. Her hands flew to his face, wiping the blood away. Why? Why did you do that? He opened his eyes, the amber depths clouded with pain but fiercely alert. The tea was the true weapon. The pin, a distraction. He gritted his teeth, a spasm of pain racking his frame. She could not poison you, directly. But if you drank of your own accord, an accident. A sudden illness. He tried to sit straighter, his breath coming in short gasps. I could not let you, he didn't finish. His body went rigid, then limp, his head lolling against the carriage wall. Unconscious. Shenli stared at him, the reality of what he had done crashing down on her. He had consumed a poison meant for her. He had taken the Empress's gambit and turned it into a sacrifice. The cold, calculating part of her mind, the part that had planned and schemed, shattered. In its place was a raw, desperate fury. They had tried to break her, to cage her, to poison her. And they had hurt him. The one person who saw her, who stood with her, who had just offered his life for hers. Tears she had not shed on the execution ground, or in the lonely library, or in the tense courtroom, now streamed down her face, hot and furious. She cradled his head in her lap, her fingers brushing the sweat-soaked hair from his brow. You will not die, she whispered, her voice a vow etched in steel. Do you hear me, Xiaochen? I will not allow it. The Empress Dowager had wanted to show her the price of defiance. She had succeeded. But she had miscalculated the reaction. She had thought to instill fear. Instead, she had forged an unbreakable resolve. Shenli looked down at the general's still face, her heart a battlefield of terror and a terrifying, newfound clarity. This was no longer just about survival or vengeance. It was about him. And for him, she would burn the entire palace of Eternal Spring to the ground. The world narrowed to the rattling carriage, the scent of blood, and the terrifying stillness of the man lying across the seats, his head a dead weight in her lap. Shenli's tears had dried almost as soon as they fell, scorched away by a fury so absolute it felt like a new kind of ice. She screamed for the driver to make for the city's outskirts, to the unmarked clinic run by her friend, Jean Hua. It was the only place she trusted. Do not let him die, she whispered, her voice a raw command to the heavens, to the fates, to the unconscious general himself. You are not permitted to die. Jean Hua, ever pragmatic, asked no questions when the carriage bearing the infamous Iron General arrived at her back door. With the help of a burly assistant, they got Xiaochen onto a treatment table in a sparse, clean room that smelled of pungent herbs. Jean Hua's skilled hands moved over him, checking his pulse at the neck, peeling back an eyelid to see the pupil, her expression growing grimmer by the second. The Empress's signature touch, Jean Hua muttered, wiping the dark blood from his lips. A slow, corrosive poison. Heart-seizing dew. It mimics a sudden apoplexy, shutting the body down from within over several hours. There is no known antidote in the imperial physician's manuals. Shenli's heart turned to stone in her chest. There is always an antidote. There has to be. The known formula was lost generations ago, Jinhua insisted, her voice tight. The Empress guards her poisons jealously. I can make a palliative, something to slow the corrosion, ease the pain, but it will not stop it. The formula is not lost, Shenli said, the words leaving her lips before her mind had fully processed them. A memory, sharp and clear from her first life, surfaced, a scroll she had seen in the restricted palace archives while waiting for Li Wei. It detailed the poisons of previous dynasties, their ingredients, and their cures. A scholarly curiosity then, a lifeline now. I know it. I need ghost's cap mushroom, dried scorpion tail vine, the root of a white baneberry, and the powdered pearl from a 9-year-old freshwater mussel. Ground together and infused with hot spring water. Jinhua stared at her, stunned. How could you possibly? The scorpion tail vine alone is lethally toxic in the wrong dosage. The poison is a fire that attacks the heart's channels, Shenli recited, the words from the forgotten scroll flowing back to her. The antidote must be a counter-fire, using toxins that target the nervous system to jolt the channels back open. It is a balance on the edge of a blade. Do you have the ingredients? I have the vine and the baneberry. The ghost's cap is rare, but I have a small store. The pearl, Jinhua shook her head. A 9-year pearl is specific. I have nothing that precise. Shenli's hand flew to her hair. Her fingers closed around the cold, heavy gold of the phoenix pin the Empress had given her. With a wrenching twist, she tore it from her coiffure. The rubies glinted, mocking her. The eyes, she said, thrusting the pin at Jinhua. The phoenix eyes. They are black pearls. Are they from a 9-year mussel? Jinhua took the pin, her eyes wide. She examined one of the tiny, perfect spheres. I cannot be certain without testing, but the size and luster, it is possible. It is the best chance we have. Then use them, Shenli commanded. Now. As Jinhua rushed to prepare the desperate antidote, Shenli knelt by Xiao Chen's side. She took his limp, calloused hand in both of hers. It was still warm. You told me a general must have a last resort, she whispered to him, her voice thick. This is mine. My knowledge. My life. I will not let you pay my debt. Do you hear me? You will live, and you will stand with me when I bring that old woman's empire down around her ears. There was no response but the shallow, troubling rhythm of his breath. Time stretched into a torturous eternity. Jinhua returned with a small, clay cup filled with a thick, foul-smelling paste. She added hot water from a kettle, stirred it, and held it to Xiao Chen's lips, trickling the concoction into his mouth. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, his body convulsed. A guttural sound tore from his throat, and he vomited a black, viscous fluid onto the floor. He gasped, a raw, sucking breath, and his back arched off the table. His eyes flew open, wide with pain and disorientation, before fluttering shut again. But his breathing, though ragged, was deeper. The deathly pallor began to recede, replaced by the flush of a feverish battle raging within him. It is working, Jinhua breathed, her face pale with awe and fear. He is fighting it. Shenli did not move from his side. She held his hand through the violent tremors, through the fevered sweat that soaked his robes. She wiped his brow with a cool cloth, her touch gentle, a stark contrast to the fury in her heart. Hours later, as a deep twilight settled, the worst of the crisis passed. Xiao Chen's breathing evened into the steady rhythm of a deep, healing sleep. Jinhua confirmed the poison was broken, his body was weak, but it would recover. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm Shenli, but there was no time for rest. The Empress had made her move. The war was now in the open. She left Xiao Chen in Jinhua's care with a battalion of instructions and a promise to return. Back at the Shen Manor, she did not go to her father. She went to his study and began to write. She wrote to every official who owed her father a debt, every military commander who respected General Xiao, every minor noble who had been trampled by the Hawkwood faction. She did not speak of the poisoning, that was a card to be played at the right moment. She spoke of the pattern, the forged ledgers, the attempted judicial murder, the Empress's overreach. She spoke of an empire rotting from the head, and the need for virtuous men to stand before it was too late. A soft knock came at the door just before dawn. It was her father. He stood there, having heard the rumors of the general's sudden illness and his daughter's frantic movements. He looked at her, surrounded by scrolls and missives, her eyes burning with a cold fire in the lamplight, and he saw not his daughter, but a leader. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice simple and direct. A wave of gratitude washed over her. "Gather your most loyal men. Secure the archives. When the time comes, we will need unimpeachable records." He nodded, a soldier accepting his orders. The baton had been passed. Xiaochen awoke to the smell of medicinal broth and the soft light of morning. His body felt like it had been trampled by horses, every muscle aching, his throat raw. The first thing he saw was Shinli, asleep in a chair beside his bed. She was still in the same dove-gray robe from the day before, now wrinkled and stained. In her lap, one hand still rested protectively over the hilt of the plain wooden dagger he had given her. The sight struck him with a force greater than any poison. She stirred, sensing his wakefulness. Her eyes opened, and the moment they focused on him, the exhaustion vanished, replaced by a blazing, relieved intensity. "You are awake," she said, her voice husky. "You are still here," he replied, his own voice a rough scrape. "Where else would I be?" She stood, poured him a cup of water, and helped him drink. Her touch was firm, competent, devoid of the fluttering hesitation of a court lady. "The poison is gone. You will be weak for a few days." He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the shadows under her eyes, the resolute set of her jaw, the phoenix pin gone from her hair. "The Empress will answer for this," Shinli finished, her tone leaving no room for doubt. She told him of the antidote, of using the pearl from the Empress's own gift to save him. A sound that was almost a laugh, choked by pain, escaped him. "You used her weapon to disarm her." His amber eyes, though weary, held a new, profound depth. "I told you knowledge was a weapon. I did not know you were a master armorer." "We have work to do, General," she said, setting the cup aside. "The court must be made to see the serpent coiled around the throne. We have the evidence of the forgery. We have the testimony of the stolen journal. And now, we have an attempted assassination of the Iron General by the Empress's own hand. It is time to unite our pieces and checkmate the Queen." Xiaochen pushed himself up, ignoring the protest of his body. The strategist in him was already aligning with hers. "We move together. My network, your foresight. We will lay the evidence before the Emperor himself. He is a weak man, but he is not blind. The sheer audacity of her attack on me may be the one thing that forces his hand." Their eyes met, a silent pact reforged in poison and fire. The cautious alliance was gone. In its place was a bond tempered in a shared crucible of survival. Shenli helped him to his feet, his weight leaning on her shoulder. She was smaller, slighter, but she held him without a tremor. He looked down at the top of her head, at the simple silver bud pin that had replaced the golden phoenix. "The pin she gave you," he said quietly. "You took it off." Shenli glanced up, a faint, true smile touching her lips for the first time in days. "It was too heavy. I prefer my own choices." In that moment, Xiaochen knew with a certainty that eclipsed all his battle-honed instincts. The phoenix had not just alighted. It had found its roost, and it was ready to set the world ablaze. And he would stand with her, until the last ember died. The air in the Grand Imperial Court was so thick with tension it was a wonder the lanterns still burned. It was not a scheduled audience, but an extraordinary convocation, called by a coalition of senior ministers and generals, a direct challenge to the normal channels of power controlled by the Empress Dowager and the Crown Prince. The hall was a sea of officials, their ranks divided by an invisible chasm. On one side, the Hawkwood faction and their allies, their faces set in lines of arrogant defiance. On the other, a growing number of those loyal to General Shen, General Xiao, and the rule of law, their expressions grim and resolute. At the center of it all stood Shenli. She was no longer standing in the shadows. She was the accuser. She wore a robe of deep indigo, the color of the sky just before dawn, and her hair was styled simply, held by the silver bud pin. She was a figure of calm intensity, her gaze fixed on the dragon throne where the emperor sat, looking old and weary, trapped between his mother and the unfolding mutiny within his court. Crown Prince Li Wei stood to the right of the throne, his face a mask of cold fury. The Empress Dowager was notably absent, pleading illness, but her presence was a palpable poison in the room. "This is an outrage." Li Wei's voice cut through the murmurs. To summon the court based on the hysterical accusations of a woman spurned? This is not justice, it is a personal vendetta, and I will not stand for it. The truth is neither hysterical nor personal, Your Highness, Shenli's voice rang out, clear and steady, silencing the room. It is a foundation of stone. And today, we are here to rebuild the empire upon it. She did not wait for his permission. She began to walk, a slow, deliberate pace before the assembled nobility, her words not an appeal, but a narrative of treason. We begin with a forgery. She held up a copy of the false ledger. A lie crafted to destroy a loyal general and seize his lands. We have the forger's journal, detailing his payment from the Hawkwood steward. She moved on. We moved to a border incident, a reckless attack designed to sacrifice loyal soldiers for political gain, a plan thwarted only by a timely warning. She paused, letting the connections form in the minds of her listeners. And then, the judicial murder of Censor Wang, a man who knew too much, silenced before he could speak. She stopped directly before the throne, turning to face the entire court. These are not isolated events. They are the threads of a single tapestry, woven by a hand that seeks to control this throne. Li Wei scoffed. Circumstantial evidence and conjecture. You have no proof linking these misfortunes to anyone in this room. Don't I? Shenli's voice dropped, becoming lethally soft. She turned her gaze fully on him. The thread leads to your steward, Your Highness. It leads to your military advisors. It leads to the shadow that stands behind you, the one who believes she rules from the palace of eternal spring. A gasp rippled through the court. To speak against the Empress Dowager so openly was tantamount to suicide. But a tapestry is not complete without its final, most brutal thread. Shenli's eyes blazed. The thread of assassination. She gestured, and the great doors of the hall opened. General Shaochen walked in. He moved slowly, his body still recovering, but his presence was a thunderclap. He was in full military regalia, the armor of the Northern Command making him a giant of polished steel and authority. His face was pale but set in lines of absolute resolve. In his hand, he held the small, clay cup from Jean Hua's clinic. 3 days ago, Xiao Chen's voice boomed, devoid of all warmth, I drank from a cup of tea in the presence of the Empress Dowager. It was poisoned with heart-seizing dew. A poison from her private arsenal, a formula she alone possesses. He held the cup aloft. The proof is in my body, and in the testimony of the physician who saved me. The Empress Dowager attempted to murder a general of the Imperial Army to silence the woman who dared to expose her grandson's crimes. The hall erupted. This was no longer about corruption, it was about a direct, treasonous attack on the military pillar of the state. Lies. Li Wei shouted, but the panic in his eyes was unmistakable. This is a conspiracy. You and that which have fabricated this entire story to seize power for yourselves. The word which hung in the air, a desperate, final slander. Shenli did not flinch. She looked from Li Wei's frantic face to the Emperor's increasingly alarmed one. This was the moment. She had to offer not just destruction, but a path forward. Your Majesty, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos and commanding silence once more. The Empire is sick. Its heart is poisoned by greed and ambition that places personal power above the lives of its people and the honor of its soldiers. We stand before you not as rebels, but as physicians. We have presented the diagnosis. The cure is in your hands. She knelt, bowing her head. I do not ask for vengeance for my family. I do not ask for glory for General Xiao. We ask for justice. We ask for an empire where the law is not a tool for the powerful, but a shield for the weak. We ask you to cut out the rot, so that the tree may live. One by one, the officials who supported her knelt behind her. Then, the neutral ministers, swayed by the overwhelming evidence and the sheer moral force of her appeal, began to kneel. Soon, nearly half the court was on its knees, not in submission, but in supplication for the soul of the empire. The emperor looked out at the sea of kneeling figures, at his son's isolated, furious form, at the unwavering presence of General Xiao and the kneeling girl who had started it all. He saw the truth. He saw the only way to save his dynasty from civil war and collapse. He stood, his voice trembling but clear. The evidence is undeniable. The conspiracy against House Shen is proven. The attack on General Xiao is an act of high treason. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Crown Prince Li Wei, you are hereby stripped of your title and status. You will be confined to the Eastern Palace pending further investigation. The Empress Dowager is to be removed from the Palace of Eternal Spring and placed under imperial guard. This court is dismissed. The finality of the decree echoed in the utter silence that followed. It was over. In the quiet of the Shin family's western garden, under the same peach tree, the world was finally still. The celebrations would come, the political maneuvering to fill the power vacuum would begin, but for this one evening, there was only the rustle of leaves and the weight of a battle ended. Shenli stood by the koi pond, watching the orange and white fish dart through the water. She felt emptied, the cold fire of her vengeance and purpose finally banked, leaving behind a quiet, profound exhaustion. She heard his footsteps behind her, familiar now. She did not need to turn. You were magnificent, Xiaochen said, coming to stand beside her. You did not just win a trial. You remade the world. We remade it, she corrected softly, finally turning to look at him. In the soft twilight, the lines of pain and fatigue on his face were more pronounced, but his eyes were clear, watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. The Emperor offered me a new title today, he said. Regent, until a new crown prince can be properly designated. Shenli's heart stuttered. It was the highest position imaginable, short of the throne itself. Will you accept? I told him I would consider it, Xiaochen replied, his gaze never leaving hers. But my answer depends on you. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. The air hummed with a new, different kind of tension. The North needs a governor, he said, repeating his words from a lifetime ago in the library. And I need a partner. The path will be harsh. The work will be endless. But the future is ours. To write. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek, his touch a brand that sent warmth flooding through her chilled veins. Shenli, will you rule with me? He was not asking her to be his consort, his ornament. He was asking her to be his equal. His partner in every sense of the word. Tears she had no strength left to fight welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow or rage. They were tears of release, of a long winter finally giving way to spring. She placed her hand in his, the hand that had held a dagger, written a ledger, and wiped poison from his lips. It was a perfect fit. We will write it together, she whispered. He smiled then, a true, unguarded smile that transformed his entire face, banishing the shadows of war and pain. He leaned forward, and his lips met hers. It was not a kiss of stolen passion or desperate longing. It was a vow. A seal upon their pact. A promise of a shared dawn, written not in blood and fire, but in the quiet, enduring strength of two souls who had walked through hell and found their way home in each other. As the first stars appeared in the violet sky, reflected in the still pond, the phoenix and the general stood together, no longer haunted by the ghosts of the past, but united in the quiet, unshakable promise of the future they would build, side by side.